Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks again for joining us here today. So this event, this lunchtime talk, is part of the Dublin Climate Action Week 2021. So this is our first Dublin Climate Action Week, and there's a great lineup of events over the week. So this event is brought to you by Codema. We are the Dublin Energy Agency, and we're delighted to be one of the organising partners of Dublin Climate Action Week. There are 4 Dublin local authorities also involved: the Dublin City Council, Fingal County Council, South Dublin County Council, and Dún Laoghaire County Council, and also in partnership with the Dublin Climate Action Regional Office. So together we have put together a great lineup of events this week for the first Dublin Climate Action Week. Also to mention that this particular talk is supported by one of the projects that we are working on called Tomorrow. It's a EU Horizon 2020 project, and it's helping us to develop a transition roadmap for Dublin to bring us to carbon neutrality by 2050. So this event then will hopefully, I suppose, educate and spread the knowledge of this particular type of low carbon intervention that will hopefully bring Dublin to that kind of low carbon future. So just let everybody know as well that this event is being recorded, and if you are tweeting about the event, if you could please use the hashtag DCAW, so DCAW21, that would be appreciated. And to let you know that during the event, if you have any questions at all, please do fire them at me through the Q&A box. So the Q&A box is at the bottom of your screens there. So we will take, and you can upvote any questions that you feel that you would like to see answered first. And we'll try and get through as many of them as possible at the end. So we're hoping to start the Q&A, so the talk will be about half an hour, and then we'll start the Q&A at about 1:30. So we'll try and get as many questions, about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So I think that's it. I think we have, most people have started to join now. So I think we'll get stuck straight into the presentation. So as I mentioned, this is this talk then is around heating and low carbon heating. So it's about transforming Dublin with low carbon heat, and specifically looking at what is called district heating and what are the benefits. So my name is Donna Gartland. I'm CEO of Codema, the Dublin Energy Agency. And for those of you who may not be very familiar with who we are, so we are a not-for-profit social enterprise. We are a company limited by a guarantee, and we were set up back in 1997. So long before climate change was cool. We were working away with the Dublin local authorities on climate mitigation and energy efficiency projects. And I suppose our services are, our main clients are the 4 Dublin local authorities, and our services are split into the different areas of research, development and innovation, awareness, communications and engagement, and low carbon project delivery. We're very much the local authorities at the heart of what we do. So to start off then, why are we talking about heat at all? And why is heat so important? So when we look at Dublin and all of the energy that we use in the Dublin region, about 46% of that is heat. So that's nearly half of all of the energy we use in Dublin is actually used for heating. So that's heating our buildings, used for hot water and for our space heating systems, and also in industries and commercial areas, like in hotels, swimming pools, etc. So there's a lot of heat that's required in Dublin, and also we do have a kind of an older housing stock as well, which require more heating than say newer houses, which would have higher efficiencies. So this gives you an idea of, I suppose, how important it is in the Dublin area. And then when we look at it in terms of emissions, you can see that it's there's around a third of our total emissions in the Dublin region is actually from the heating sector as well. So it's just as important as electricity and just as important as transport in terms of tackling those emissions. So while there's a lot of focus on, and rightly so, there's a lot of focus on moving people to lower forms of low carbon transport, and a lot of interest in renewable electricity, heat is often left behind and not really thought about that much. So I suppose we want to kind of put the focus back on that and how we can decarbonize that in the Dublin area. So at the moment, where does our heat come from? So this graph shows the breakdown of all the different types of fuels that we use for heating in Dublin. And you can see that the vast majority of our heating comes from electricity and natural gas, and a small bit of oil as well. So in the purple line there is all of Dublin together, and then it's also separated into the 4 Dublin local authorities. So you can see gas is obviously the predominant fuel that we use for our heating systems. There is a bit of electricity used, and that's mostly in the Dublin city area, and that's mostly through electric heating storage heaters that would have been put in around 15, 20 years ago in a lot of the kind of buildings that were built around that period. But they are kind of inefficient and very hard to control systems. So they've gone kind of out of fashion now, and new electricity systems and heating systems are called heat pumps, and they're being used instead. So we're hoping that we'll see that kind of switch over in terms of using electricity for heat. But the vast majority, as you can see, is still fossil fuel based. So we're still looking at, our heating comes from gas and oil. So the big challenge then is, the government has set very high targets for us to reduce our carbon emissions. And from a Dublin perspective, this graph shows what that would look like in terms of our emissions. So you can see how where we are now at 2021, and our baseline, the baseline of the projected emissions. So we have to reduce our emissions by 51% across Ireland by 2030. At around a 7% per year reduction. And so cumulatively, that's about 51% by 2030. And you can see that's based on a baseline of 1990. And you can see there that our energy use and our emissions have actually gone up in that time. So we're using more energy now, as we've developed, we've grown, we've more industries, we have a bigger population, more buildings to serve. So that energy use has gone up. So we haven't had that decoupling of emissions and growth as much as we would like. And you can see that it's grown. We've kind of bounced back up since the last recession in terms of emissions as well. And you can see then the 2030 bar there shows where we need to be by 2030, and then right down to 2050, where there needs to be an 80% reduction overall in our energy use, or sorry, in our emissions in energy. So we've a long way to go. So there's a big target, a big challenge for us to get there by, to hit our 2030 targets. So when we look at heat then specifically, and we say, well, what can we do in the heating area to kind of help to achieve those targets? And we look at, what's happening across Europe, what other countries are doing well, and in terms of renewable heating and cooling, and how can we copy them? So you can see Ireland are down here, unfortunately, down at the very bottom of the queue, in the second last place. And actually, I think we've probably moved into last place now. I think the Netherlands may have leapfrogged us in the last year. So we are doing very poorly in comparison to our European neighbours in terms of renewable heat. But I suppose the advantage is we can have a look at the guys that are up the other end of the table and say, well, what are these guys doing well, and how can we replicate that in Ireland? And you'll see there, parts of that, all those bar charts there at the other end of the table, that piece, the green piece, is district heating. So, we can see that all the countries that are at the other end, the higher end of the scale, all have large percentages of district heating that are delivering renewable heat into their systems. So how and what is district heating, and why aren't we doing it in Ireland? So what district heating is an underground pipeline which delivers hot water to buildings to meet their space heating and hot water demands. So if we think about it, it's a bit like an electricity grid, but for heating, for hot water. So instead of electricity being delivered to your home and metered and paying your electricity bill, you will have heat that's coming to your home through an underground network and being metered, and you pay your heating bill. So you don't have the on-site generator, you don't have the on-site boiler. The heat is produced elsewhere in much the same way you don't have an electricity, you don't have a wind turbine in your back garden, or but maybe some people do. But we don't have a diesel generator running to provide electricity in our back gardens. It comes from the grid, and in the same way, this is just a heat grid. So you can see there the picture that shows the pipelines, the type of pipelines that we use that are highly insulated, so that we try to reduce the losses as much as possible. and that the heat is delivered then to homes and, as I said, metered on site. And this is not a new thing. This is not a new technology. While it's quite alien to us here in Ireland, because we all have our own little boilers at home, you know, it is used widely across most other European countries. So you can see there, all of the red dots on the map represent all of the cities and all of the areas around Europe that have district heating systems in place already. So you can see, you know, a lot of countries have a lot of district heating, and there are cities such as Copenhagen and Stockholm, which would have nearly, you know, 90% of their buildings connected to district heating networks. And in fact, in Denmark, they have built their first district heating scheme back in 1910. So they've started it 100 years ago. So we have a little bit of probably of catching up to do there. But the good news is they've made all the mistakes, and we can learn them from the best practice, and, you know, and start at that level. So why should we develop district heating in Dublin? So obviously there's carbon emission reductions and there's all that good stuff and the climate change issues, but, you know, let's go back to what the kind of vision we want for Dublin is. You know, what is the kind of vision we want for Dublin, and how can district heating play a part of that? I mean, we want a city and an area, a county that's got cleaner air. We want a protected environment. We want a circular economy. We want to reduce our waste. We want more local businesses, local resources, local jobs, using local resources and creating local jobs. And we want increased comfort, health, and well-being. And I'm going to show you and talk a bit about how district heating contributes to all of these aspects and making Dublin a more livable city, as well as it helping to obviously reduce carbon emissions. So, with the first thing about clean air. So if you don't have to produce your own heat on site, if you don't have to produce your own heat in your own home or your own building, then you don't have combustion of fuels on site. So you're not burning anything. So you don't need to have a boiler. You don't need to have a chimney, and therefore, obviously, if you don't need to have any of those things, there's no issues with air quality from burning solid fuels or fossil fuels in your home. So that obviously leads to cleaner air and cleaner environments for communities that are connected to district heating. It's also lower cost. So district heating systems utilize many different sources of heat and connect them into the one grid, which helps to lower the cost of heat, because you've got a more competitive market. So, you know, you have different sources of heat supplying in. And also a lot of those sources of heat, or the majority of those sources of heat, are either what's called waste heat, which I'll explain a little bit later on, or renewable heat, which is produced renewably, and therefore there's no fossil fuels to be bought and burnt and combusted. So it's a lower cost to actually produce the heat. It increases comfort, safety, and convenience. So what I mean by that is district heating is because it's delivering heat to your home. You can basically just turn on your heating, turn on your shower, and it's on-demand hot water. It's on-demand space heating. So you're not waiting for your hot water tank to fill up. The hot water is always there, ready to go. So obviously that's very convenient if you have a big family and a queue at the bathroom door, or you're a student and you're sharing a house. There's also increased safety because you don't have gas coming into your home, or an oil tanker in your back garden. So you don't have any fossil fuels or any, you don't need carbon monoxide alarms, for example, or that kind of thing, because there's no fuels coming into your home or your business. And obviously then the increased comfort of having that and having a nice temperature in your house all day. So district heating is suited to kind of having a level temperature all day in your house, and running your temperatures at your radiators at a slightly lower temperature for longer. And therefore, you know, you don't get that kind of peaks and troughs of being freezing, roasting like you do in your house when you turn it on and off your boiler a lot of the time. So it also is more accessible to more people. So district heating is lower cost form of low carbon heat because it's a lower cost to the customer connecting. So you're not having to put in your own heating system. You're putting in what's called a heat exchanger, and that exchanges the heat from the network and into your home's heating system, water-based heating system. So into your current radiators. So it matches very well with and integrates with existing water-based systems, like your radiator systems that you'd have for that are already there from your gas or your oil boilers. It's very, very easy to use. It's, you know, if you're switching on and off your heat, so you don't have to, I suppose, learn how to use a new technology. It's just basically switching on and off, controlling your temperature in different rooms. And it also supports community cooperatives. And what I mean by that is, so if we look at other countries, like in Denmark, for example, all of their district heating systems are not-for-profit. They're mandated to be not-for-profit. So they're either run by local authorities or by community groups. And so there's lots of community district heating cooperatives in the likes of Denmark and Sweden and Scandinavia. And there's actually the first district heating co-op as well in Ireland, in Mayo, who are looking to develop a small district heating scheme there for their community. So it's great to see how this is accessible, and this can actually be, you know, more accessible to communities, this type of heating solution. Then we have, it's obviously bringing a new market. So because it's a new type of energy system, it's a new market for Dublin. It's going to create new local employment. It's a brand new system, and therefore, and it's also going to provide a new income for local suppliers. So people who are providing heat into the system, it's a new market for them. And it's future-proofed, so that when new technologies come along or new sources of heat come along, we can connect them into the district heating system, and then that's provided to your home, rather than you changing your existing, rather than you kind of upgrading your system again at any stage in the future. So what you have then in your home, your business, is future-proofed, and the supply to you, it becomes more renewable or lower carbon as new technologies come online. It also has the benefit of being able to recycle what's called waste heat. So to explain what that is, waste heat is, so if you go travel around Dublin, you'll often see large chimney stacks from industries and power stations and breweries and bakeries, and they have, you know, what we would call smoke coming from the chimneys, but actually most of this is steam. So this is waste heat that is actually thrown away as a byproduct, because it's not they use it at a very high temperatures in these industries, and then once it becomes lower temperature, you know, when it's not usable for their processes anymore, they throw the rest of that away. And those temperatures are exactly the type of thing that we need to supply space heating and hot water to our businesses. So in some areas we have these large industries who are throwing away heat, and then next door we have a building who's burning gas or burning oil to produce heat. So what we want to do is basically match those together. And that's just the heat that we see. There's the kind of high temperature heat, but there's also lots of heat that comes from other sources that we can't see because it's not at maybe that kind of 80 or 90 degrees. So we don't see it coming from chimneys. But there are lots of heat coming like at 30, 40 degrees from the likes of data centers, wastewater treatment plants, and other industries that you would kind of have lower temperature waste heat available. And you'll often hear people talk about energy and energy storage and batteries, and how do we store energy? How do we store renewable energy? And if we see how much actually heat energy that we use and we need, thermal storage is actually a big part of the solution for us. And thermal storage is basically a hot water tank. So it's a highly insulated hot water tank, just a much bigger version of the one that you have at home in your hot press. And obviously that's very, very cheap. It's just a big hot water tank. And that allows us to store waste heat or renewable heat in these tanks for times when it's needed. So that obviously helps us then, if we have lots of, say, renewable electricity on the grid and it's not being used, or, you know, there's too much on the grid and it can't handle it, what we can do is use that renewable electricity to produce heat. So we turn on an electric boiler or we turn on an electric heat pump, and we store that heat in a thermal storage tank to provide heat then into the district heating network. So that way we can therefore lower emissions, not just in the heating sector, but also help integrate more renewables onto the electricity system. So therefore you can kind of see how district heating is an advantage in both ways. And I suppose in terms of security of supply then, you know, a district heating network, it can integrate many, many different sources of heat into the one system. So say in the summertime, we might have a lot of solar thermal being fed into the district heating network, and that might cover the summer load. Then we might have heat pumps or electric heating turning on when we have lots of wind blowing maybe in the winter time, when we have maybe too much wind on the grid, or we have you know, base loads of geothermal or waste heat going into the system. So there's lots of different, and that's all managed and balanced then through these big hot water storage tanks. And that's all done at a system level, and you just turn on and off your heating at home, oblivious to all this stuff that's going on the other side. That's helping to lower our carbon emissions. So when we look at Dublin then, where do we start developing district heating? Like, so what do we do? What's the first steps? So what we've been doing and what we've been, how we've been working with the Dublin local authorities is starting with what's called heat planning. So this is something that's done regularly across Europe, and this is one of the first steps. So when we looked at those other countries that have lots of district heating, we asked them, well, what do you do? Where do we start? And they said, you know, they advise us that they have to start looking at where the heat is being used first, and map that out. So we started mapping the areas that were suitable for district heating. And what I mean by that is, there's areas that are suitable for district heating is where the heat is close together, is where the heat demands are as close together as possible, is the best areas for district heating. So if you can imagine, the closer the heat demands are together, the shorter the pipelines that we need to connect them, and therefore that's like a much lower cost than to put in that network. So the most feasible areas are areas where we have what's called highest heat demand density, and the thresholds for the kind of very feasible areas and feasible areas for district heating, we looked at what's cost optimal, what was what's economically viable in terms of the cost of pipes, and then connecting those together. And so across the whole Dublin region, we mapped this out, and you can see all the areas there that are dark orange and red are either feasible or very feasible, and they actually amount to 65% of all of our heat demand in Dublin is currently suitable for district heating. And you can see the yellow area there is feasible if we had new government supporting regulations. So if we had further supports for district heating, we'd also be able to take in that other yellow part of the map as well. And say in a dense urban area, like just Dublin City, 86% of our heat demand in the Dublin City area, for example, is suitable for district heating. So, and then there's, for anyone who might be joining, who might be outside of Dublin, there is an Irish heat atlas available online where you can check out what other areas outside of Dublin are suitable for district heating. I think it's around, it's 57% of all of Ireland would be suitable for district heating. Their heat demands would be suitable for district heating if we had that kind of government supporting regulation there as well. So this is not just a Dublin solution, but obviously that we're the Dublin Energy Agency, and this is Dublin Climate Action Week. So this is why we're focused on the Dublin region in particular today. So that's the demand side. Now we know where the heat is being used, where the heat is needed. Then we look at how can we supply, where can we supply that heat from? And what we look at first is areas where there's existing heat sources. So where are we throwing away heat that we can kind of recirculate that, and it comes into that circular economy and reducing waste. So how can we recycle that? So we have a lot of data centers in and around the Dublin area that are already there. And they have a significant amount of waste heat. Now it's at that lower temperature, so it's not at the 80 degrees. It's at lower temperatures like 25 to 35 degrees, but that's still very usable. So we can use that in our district heating networks, and there's lots of them around Dublin, so a significant amount. We also have a significant amount of power stations that are very close, either in the city centre. We have a few power stations around the Poolbeg area in Dublin city centre, so they're obviously very close to the highest heat demand areas, and also power stations out in Hunstown. So all electricity, when I say power stations, these are stations that create electricity. So they generate electricity through burning of gas or waste. And the majority of the fuel and that go into power stations is actually thrown away or is actually a waste product. So the efficiency of power stations is a maximum of around 40–45%, even for very new power stations. So the other 50%, is waste heat basically. So how, we should be recycling that, we should be using that. And this is what they're doing. This is very common practice across Europe. We also have lots of other sources such as wastewater treatment plants that have lots of waste heat from their processes, and lots of industries as well. So there would be, bakeries, your Guinness brewery down along the quays. There's lots of these big industries that produce lots of waste heat, and not only, I suppose, waste heat, but we're also looking at renewables such as deep geothermal. So there's lots of potential to use deep geothermal in Dublin because we're sitting on the Dublin Basin. So when we add up all of these sources of heat, we have the equivalent of over 1 million households worth of heat available already sitting there in Dublin that's untapped, and that instead we're importing fossil fuels. So obviously you can see from this that it's, it seems like a no-brainer for us to start developing these schemes. So we've been working with the local authorities then to identify district heating zones or pilot areas so that we can start to lay the groundwork for district heating. So all local authorities in Dublin have to identify strategic energy zones through the planning, the county development plans. So we've been looking at highlighting areas where there's an overlap of these high heat density areas and where there is heat available. And also looking at areas of new developments, because obviously easier to integrate district heating in at the very beginning, so you're not retrofitting, so you're going in there before they put in any other fossil fuel technology like boilers or anything like gas boilers. And we're also trying to target then the areas with the highest fossil fuel use, obviously, because we want to switch them over first so that we can get the highest carbon emissions reductions. Just to remind anybody as I'm going on, I know I'm trying to cover a lot here. If you do have questions, please do put them in the Q&A box as I'm going along. So then when we look at, how do we decarbonize the whole of Dublin then? So district heating is viable for, as I said, that percentage of Dublin. So, what about the rest? And we have developed these maps and these areas where it shows where district heating will be suitable and where heat pumps will be more suitable. So heat pumps are obviously the other solution that would support the total decarbonisation of the heating sector in Dublin. So, by 2030 then, what we would need going on those that glide path targets, we need about 140,000 heat pumps installed in the Dublin region and about 1,500 kilometres of district heating distribution network installed by 2030. So you can see that it is quite a challenge to get us there. But it's by laying it's by putting these plans in place now, we're preparing ourselves for the best solution possible. So fortunately, Dublin is leading the way in this field, and we are already working on schemes. So we have the first large-scale schemes in Ireland being developed in the Dublin area, so by Dublin City Council and South Dublin County Council, and we at Codema are supporting both of those councils on those projects. And we, of course, have had great support from EU funding programmes and the Department of Environment and Climate Action, Climate and Communications Climate Action Fund, and also the SEAI have all been very supportive and have made these projects possible for us. So the first one I'll just introduce is the Tallaght district heating system, as seen on RTE the other night when we did a tour of this scheme, and it was picked up on the RTE News, which was great. So this scheme in the Tallaght area, which is in South Dublin County Council, it is taking waste heat from an Amazon Web Services data center, and we are providing that then through an energy center. We're using that in combination with a heat pump, which brings it up to the temperature then that we need to supply the buildings, and it's going to has enough heat capacity to heat over 5,000 households just from that one data center. And we're connecting it to the TUD Tallaght main campus at the moment, so the pipes are going in the ground at the moment. So anyone who's maybe from the Tallaght area, apologies for any disturbances in traffic around the Tallaght area while these pipes are going in, but they will all, they're really flying along now, and they will all be finished soon. And we're also connecting then South Dublin Council's own buildings in that area and picking up other new buildings along the way. So that's one scheme. And there's obviously, we're working with the South Dublin to look at other district heating opportunity areas, which are outlined in their county development plan, where there's 250,000 tonnes of CO2 reductions possible across these potential district heating zones. The other area, the other pilot project, well, I don't want to call it a pilot project because it's a project, but it is, I suppose, like laying a lot of groundwork for other projects to follow. Is a very large scheme that we're planning in the Dublin City Council area, starting in the Docklands, taking the waste heat from the waste to energy plant and that will provide heat to the new developments, the new buildings that are being developed in the Poolbeg areas. That's the old glass bottle site. So there's a lot of new housing and new commercial developments going into that zone. They'll all be connected to the district heating network, and that pipework will go up through Ringsend and connect in as much of the buildings in that area as possible. There's a lot of social housing blocks down there that we're going to pick up, and I know that there is a sustainable energy community in that area, that Irishtown Ringsend area, that we would like to engage with and pick them up as well. And then into the Docklands SDZ, which is Strategic Development Zone, sorry for the acronyms, in the Spencer Dock area and the Grand Canal Dock area. A lot of those buildings have already been future-proofed to connect to district heating thanks to the Dublin City Council planning conditions. And there's already bits of pipe in place. So there's already a pipe going underneath the Liffey Tunnel out to the other side, onto the north side. And we've already got pipes in the ground around the Point Theatre and under the Lewis line, and that, so it is future-proofed to connect to the north side of the city as well. Other schemes that we want to, so we're just at the beginning of, so this we're planting some potential seeds with some stakeholders in the Blanchardstown area, looking to develop a district heating scheme there, where there is a large data centre who are very engaged and who do want to provide heat to a local district heating network. They are water-cooled data centre, which means the temperature that we can take from them is actually higher than the one in the Tala scheme. And they also have a lot of on-site power production capacity as well that they will be looking to turn on and off at certain times. So we want to make sure that we're there to be able to utilise that waste heat from that data centre and connect key customers such as Sport Ireland and the National Aquatic Centre, TUD Blanchardstown campus, and the big kind of HSE buildings and hospitals around that area as well. And then obviously connecting in then to further into the communities around Corduff area will be the long-term plan. So we're just at the very beginning of talking to stakeholders on that. So I suppose they're the kind of key projects that we've started, and it shows kind of real life examples. So this is not just a theoretical thing that we're talking about. It is something that we are actually developing on the ground. So yeah, I suppose that's the kind of a very quick half-hour overview of district heating. So I hope I've covered, because I know there's a mix of different people on the call, so I tried to not to be too technical. So I hope that was okay. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now and go to the Q&A. So bear with me 1 second. Stop sharing. Okay, I think I'm back now. So I'll just jump straight into the Q&A. So let me think. Yeah, well, the first question I can answer very quickly. Yes, the slides will be available, and the recording of this will be available as soon as possible. Obviously, we have a lot of events on this week. We have a lot of events on this week with the Climate Action Week, but our communications team, as soon as possible, will have everything up on the website and will be available afterwards. So thanks for your question, John. And Claire has a question. Could you share an example of a government regulation that would help with the district heating feasibility? Yeah, so Claire, I suppose if you look at, I suppose as an example, then, if we look at what's made us so successful in, say, in Nordic countries in Scandinavia, they had two things really that really helped. One was carbon tax, so a significant carbon tax on fossil fuels. They've had that in for a long time. So I know we are ramping ours up now, but it's still very hard to make district heating stack up against very, very cheap gas in areas like Dublin. So when you're putting in and you're investing in a kind of a network that has to go into the ground, whereas gas has been publicly funded for decades, and then the fuel itself is very, very cheap, and it doesn't take account of obviously all the externalities, the costs to the environment yet. So yeah, obviously increasing carbon taxes would really help. And the other one is mandatory heat planning. So in the these were things that were brought in the 70s, back in when the oil crisis hit, that the likes of Denmark and Sweden brought in mandatory heat planning laws, so that local authorities and municipalities would have to have a requirement to zone and plan for low carbon heat in their areas. So if we had that, we could actually bring in, like that kind of map I showed of zones for district heating and zones for heat pumps, we could make that actually mandatory, or we could make that, bringing it into the planning regulations, where the planning authorities would say, well, actually you are in this zone, so therefore, district heating should be your go-to low carbon. It's the lowest carbon form of heat for your building, and so those kind of things would really help, as well as having. Because we are at the very beginning of developing district heating, another thing that other governments have done is provide like a low-cost green loan to local authorities, so that they'd have a fund that they could go and request and ask once they built up a business case for say a district heating system in a particular area. They could go to that fund and say, yes, okay, we need 20 million to develop this scheme. Because obviously local authority budgets, particularly in Ireland, are much lower than say they would be across Europe and other areas, and the local authorities here would have a much lower level of autonomy than they would have in other countries. So they would need that kind of budgetary assurance to be able to develop out these schemes. So I hope that answered your question. I'll just kind of go through other ones here. Is it possible where there are significant residential developments in areas of high heat demand that government would define district heating as critical infrastructure to be used in these areas? So I would hope so, and I suppose the one good bit of news is that we are expecting district heating to be highlighted, feature very prominently in the new climate action plan. As I said, like that challenge to reach that 51% target is huge, and we will need all the different technologies and all the different solutions. I think district heating will definitely be one of those, and there will have to be government policy to support that, to support the role of district heating growth in Ireland. So that could definitely be one thing, and that might actually even fit in with the heat planning at a local level, and kind of deciding which areas would require district heating to go in, so that they could feed directly into those areas of new developments, because obviously we're expecting a lot of new housing to be built as well. So it will be very important to kind of try and capture that as soon as possible. So I'm just trying to see what other questions. So the Clonburris SDZ between Clondalkin and Lucan, which will have 15,500 new dwellings, given its proximity to Grange Castle Business Park, which has a number of data centres. Should it be an obvious greenfield site for district heating? But will the energy demand of new houses be too low to need an external heating input? So yeah, that's a very good question. So one of the benefits, I suppose, of district heating is that, and particularly, I suppose, matching it with low temperature sources such as those from data centres. So A-rated buildings still need heat. They still require heat. They still need, so while they might need as much space heat, they still need domestic hot water. And that domestic hot water still has to come in, at above 50 degrees. And they still do need an element of space heating as well. So they'll always need that. And if you've got, instead of having them, invest in, or, the price of housing, I suppose, is already, as we know, significantly high, and the price of construction, instead of all those buildings having their own, even though they are new builds, they will still have a heat pump, and they will still have to put in a heat pump to provide that heat. Instead of having them all invest in their own heat pumps, they could be connected to a data center that could provide the heat directly to those buildings, because you wouldn't be need, for new buildings, you don't need to supply 85 degrees. You could be supplying a much lower temperature that could come directly from the data centers in the Grange Castle Business Park. And I know in Grange Castle as well, there's also a huge potential to connect the other, there's a big power plant also planned for Grange Castle that could provide the higher temperature heat to some of the pharmaceutical plants and other industries actually in Grange Castle. So not just decarbonising the residential stock, but also the kind of commercial and industry, which also have very high heat demands and use a lot of, would have big gas boilers on site. So, it would help to obviously try and decarbonise those. It's just as important to decarbonise those as well. So thanks very much for that question. It's definitely an area, like it's outlined in that map of South Dublin opportunity areas. That is one of the key areas that we would see district heating playing, is it playing obvious, as you say yourself, obvious, it is an obvious place to develop district heating. let me see now. Share stakeholder engagement experiences around Blanchetown district heating so far. Well, we're at the very, very early stages of that at the moment, and that has kind of how we've engaged stakeholders is really just like knocking on doors. So we already work with TUD on their other two campuses, so in Tallaght and in Grangegorman. So they were obviously very open to looking at district heating for their Blanchetown campus. The HSE are decarbonising their whole buildings, their buildings, that they have a full plan. They have an energy bureau internally, and we've been working with them and advising them on different aspects of their energy use. And they're obviously very interested in looking at how district heating can connect to them. And then ARP, who are the engineers who are helping Sport Ireland redevelop their particular site, approached us as well and said, look, is district heating something that we can incorporate into the plans for Sport Ireland's new campus? Because they actually came with the same map basically as we had, showing the potential for a district heating scheme in this particular area. Also, then what was key to that then, Danielle, was the fact that that data centre that was in that Blanchetown area had a requirement. So we worked with the Fingal planning team, and when the planning application came in for that data centre, we said to them, look, they should be really future-proof to connect to a district heating system. And so that is actually in there. So that data centre are ready to connect. So they already have all that system in there. So we spoke to their chief exec here, and he's also their sustainability lead. And he was like 100% behind it, saying, yes, they're ready to go. They'd love to supply into a district heating network. It only helps obviously their emissions and their sustainability. So it's all about that kind of incremental kind of putting those kind of future-proof steps in place and engaging the stakeholders. I suppose everybody kind of knows us as a point of contact to go to for district heating in Dublin. So we can kind of match those stakeholders and help that kind of facilitation piece to kind of bring the stakeholders together. So I suppose that's how kind of we're starting to engage and kind of bring those stakeholders together now and look at potential way to develop that particular project. It's at very, very early stages now. It's just like a concept idea, and we do have some of the councillors from Fingal County Council are going to come to that meeting as well. So sorry, there's a load of questions here, but I am trying to get through as much as possible. So another question in, we would like to decarbonise our personal home heating. Would we be better waiting for district heating if it's available in our area of Tallaght in the next 2 or 3 years, or purchase a heat pump now? So that's a very, very good question. And it is a bit of a kind of a conundrum, I suppose. It's when will district heating come to your area? The only thing I can advise doing is contacting your local councillor or your county council and asking them when, telling them where your address is and getting them to kind of give a kind of an approximate date of when they would see that connection coming past your area or into your area. And if it is within that time frame, that that you could actually potentially connect to that scheme. So I suggest that'd be your first point of contact, would be to go and talk to your local council to see when it might be available in your area. But then the other options, if it isn't going to be available in your area in the near term, obviously heat pump is the next best option. So we've just 2 minutes left, so I'm just basically nearly going in order as they come in. So a question here, what about long-term supply of waste heat? Is this something that we should be concerned about? So I suppose in terms of long-term waste heat, like that kind of slide I showed earlier, where it's diversification of supply. So while waste heat may be the first thing that you would use to supply the kind of first customers, we always have a backup first off. So we always have a backup there, so that say for any particular reason. Now data centers are quite a safe bet, because for every minute they're down, they're losing billions of data sales. So the chance of them going down are very low. So that's what their job is to keep those data centers up and running. But we always have a backup there. So in the Tallaght scheme, for example, we have electric backup boilers that will switch on and will supply the heat if anything, if there was anything to go wrong with the data center for any particular reason. But in the long term, like, we're also already looking at other supplies into that Tallaght district heating system. So we're already looking at geothermal and other things that we can kind of bring into that scheme as well. No, I am sorry. I know there's probably 500. There's a lot of other questions that have come in. And I will, like, what I will do is I'll try and we'll maybe, if we can get hold of the questions afterwards, I'll try and put up a response to them by, you know, we'll email a response around to everybody or put them up on our site or something. But I'm afraid I do have to wrap up there because it is 1:45 now. So I'm look, it's really great to see all the interest in this talk, and all the questions coming in are really great. So like, I'm delighted to see it, and just to let everybody know that, you know, we do have, I suppose, lots of other events on this week. So please do go to our Dublin Climate Action Week website. So it's dublinclimateactionweek.ie, and we have lots of other events on during the week. So we have we have an event on Friday. It's the tomorrow. Thursday we have an event, Save Energy at Home. That's on at 1 o'clock. So if you want to learn a bit more about how you can save energy in your own home, there's an event on tomorrow evening as well at the Fisborough Village Climate Club. So they're talking about all their kind of draft master plan and the plans they have for the Fisborough area, so which is very interesting. They're doing lots of great work in that community. We have other sustainable energy community events, looking at 3 different sustainable energy communities in the Dublin region on Friday at 1 o'clock. And at 2 o'clock on Friday, we have a Women in Energy event, which I'll be hosting and chatting to very interesting guests who have had lots of experience in the energy sector. And we'll have different polls, and it's about reconnecting with the Women in Energy group in Ireland. On Saturday, we'll have an Ask the Expert session, where we'll have people there who are talking about their particular technologies and their area of expertise, such as heat pumps and insulation and grants. So, you know, all the experts will be there in the room, and you can fire any questions you have at them at that on Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning. So get your cup of coffee and get fired up for that. And on Sunday, we will have a walking tour of the sustainable energy community in Bettermine. So that's a Fernhill walking tour then on Sunday. So please do check out the website and all the other events. And thanks a million again for everybody who's taken time over their lunch to join in today. Really appreciate it, and big thank you, and hopefully see you all soon at another event. Thank you.